Most artists start by adding more and more paint. My first step is how to remove it. Let me show you how. Sometimes people ask me, do I need to do the drawing first? No, you don't need the drawing first, but I like to do the drawing first. Actually, I like to make all my decisions during the drawing process. While drawing, I do like to show a lot of tones. I like to map out my darkest darks and where my highlights are going to be. And I really want to have all the explanation of how this painting is going to look on the canvas before I even pull out a brush. My next step will be to pull out the fixative. And fixative is, it's like it stops the sketch from smearing. It really stops the sketch from moving, especially if you use something like charcoal. If you use charcoal as your drawing, you definitely need to pull out the fixative. You don't want that sketch to smear. How do I know what color I should use as my underpainting? Now, this is something that is completely up to you. I like to choose a color that's going to complement the painting in its entirety when it's done. Since I wait for my paint to dry, there's certain pockets or pieces of the underpainting that will show through in the final piece of work. And I want that color to make sense for the final piece of work. Now, traditionally, they would use like browns or maybe a grayscale. I am not that traditional. I am currently pulling out a bright pink. It is Gamblin's Quinacridone Magenta. So no, not a traditional color at all. But the way I was thinking about it is that the colors that's going to be in this final painting is pink, green, and brown. The pink is for the flowers, the green is for the ivy leaves, and the brown is for the skin tone. And if you know anything about colors, brown is really just a deep orange, which makes a lot of this painting going to be warm. So I stuck with a warm a warm color, and I'm going to be very happy and delighted to see pops of bright pink popping on the flowers for the very soft pink. I may not be explaining that 100% great, but like it's in my mind. I know exactly what's going on in my mind. And if you haven't figured out exactly what this painting is and who this painting is for, I'm not going to tell you. Maybe leave it in the comment. You could also choose a complementary color to your painting. So say if you did a lot of blues, like a very cool tone painting, you can have your underpainting be a very bright orange, or how about a burnt sienna, which is like a brown, but when you do an underpainting on it, it looks like a bright orange, and it would complement it so great. It would really make the blues pop. So you got to really experiment and figure out exactly what color is going to suit you and the mood for the painting. But I'm going for hot pink again. Maybe I should have started with this question, but it says, what is an underpainting? I'm sorry. Let me explain. It's that first layer of paint that usually is monochromatic and it adds value. It shows the highlights. It shows the shadows. It really, it's like the base layer that really shows the dimension of the painting. Why start with this toned canvas or this one color? Now, I find that, in my experience, and I've heard from other artists, that the blank white, stark white canvas is very daunting, and they feel a lot of pressure about that first touching of color. When you make a decision to make the whole thing one color and then move on, it really takes that fear, that daunting experience away. Do you have to do an underpainting? Underpainting is absolutely optional. You can start your painting any way you would like. This is just a tool to really help you flow and get your process going. If you don't have any problems with value, or you don't struggle with that blank white canvas, you're fine. You're fine. You can start right on in. Nobody is going to tell you that you have to do an underpainting. It is completely optional. How do I know where to remove the paint? So that's easy. I start off, the first wipe is just to get the paint like evenly applied to the canvas. Basically, some strokes have thicker amounts of paint on the canvas and not. So when I really do my first swipes all over, that's just to make the paint even all across the canvas. From there, I really like to go in and remove the lighter parts. So anything that's slightly lighter than mid is going to get removed. And then I'm going to use a solvent to really get the highlights showing. To get something that's bright, bright white, I use a little bit of paint remover, and I really dig in there and get all the paint off. What am I using to wipe off the paint? Now, you can technically use anything to remove the paint. I go in with a clean paper towel, Q-tips if I need to be very precise, solvent paint thinner to get the brightest brights and the highlights removed, and then that's pretty much it. You can use rags, sponges, whatever your heart's desire to remove the paint. I personally like paper towels. They're disposable. I can move on with my life. How thin should the paint layer be? Oh, this is the thing. The consistency of the paint that I use, I've tried really thin and I've tried really thick, and I prefer somewhere in the middle. I like using enough paint and solvent that it applies to the canvas without dripping. That's where I really like it to be. Too thick, you're using too much paint and it's a little wasteful, and too thin, it's dripping everywhere, and it removes a lot easier, and it's really hard to show the shadows if it's too thin. But I've seen artists do it both ways, and if you enjoy it that way, go ahead. But for me, somewhere in the middle where it's not dripping but it's not so thick that it's wasteful. Do you let the underpainting dry before you start painting? Yes, absolutely. Yes, I do. I give it a couple of days. You want it really to be dry, or you're going to be mixing wet paint with, in this painting, a very bright pink, and that's not the vibe. What I do like is when the hot pink shows through the brush strokes. Does this make the painting go faster or slower? It personally, for me, it makes it go faster because I've learned to do all the decision making before I start painting. That's all this has taught me to do. I know exactly where the highlights are going to be, where the shadows are going to be, where the midtones are, and how everything's going to look in the end. I make all of my decisions way before I put that paint on the canvas. And that's how I like it. So I can not think about the composition or how the colors are going to look next to each other. I do all that decision making process in Procreate beforehand. And so when I'm painting, I'm honestly listening to music, jamming out, and maybe listening to a book in some type of romantic adventure somewhere. My mind's elsewhere. It's not, I'm not considering the process of the painting because I've already made my decisions beforehand. Can this work for any subject? Absolutely. I've seen landscape artists do this. I've seen portrait artists do this. I've seen, I haven't seen abstract artists do it. I guess it may not be necessary in abstract work, but if you have a subject in mind, it probably works for that. I've not seen any artist hold back on that. If you have any other questions, you can leave them down in the comments. And that's it. That's my reductive underpainting process.